Sa babo, halatang-halata ha, maisama ko na rin si Senador de Lima. Noong ang NBI naman po ang nag-imbestiga tungkol dito sa Mamasapano, tingnan niyo po ang itsura ng investigasyon ni Senador de Lima. Napakadaming reduction yung nirelease nila. Oh. Puro kurado. Very plain that there is a cover-up here on the part of Secretary de Lima under whose department is found the NBI. Ito yung puro gano'n, no? Napakaraming Pinagtakpan, no? Literally, ito yung mga chart, no? It is literally a cover-up, oh. Naglabas pa sila ng report, pinagtatanggalin pala nila. Para ano pa? Oh, ito nyo naman ang ginawa nung panahon ni Secretary de Lima sa pag-imbestiga. Puro reduction. May mababasa ba kayo dyan? Wala, oh.
Conclusion po ng team is that the nature and extent of the American involvement, at ito nga po yung American involvement ay limited lang sa technical and intelligence support, medical evaluation, and humanitarian assistance. So walang mga American troops or personnel na involved in actual combat. Merong covert ISR role. ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Merong paggamit ng surveillance aircraft, but which were not armed attack planes and did not engage in or conduct air strikes, but purely for purposes of monitoring. Meron din pong presence of certain American personnel and setting up of monitor at the tactical command post. Pero hanggang doon lang po, hindi po sila talaga yung nag-handle yung operations. And therefore, wala mong nakikita ang team ng paglabag sa ating saligang batas, sa ating revised penal code and other special penal laws.
Morning,
Madam.
Your Honor.
In international law, is there a distinction between international armed conflict on the one hand and non-international armed conflict on the other hand? Since you mentioned this in your statement.
Oh, yes, Your Honor.
I ask this question basically for the education of the public.
The difference between international armed conflict and non-international armed conflict. Well, under the Geneva Convention, under the Rome Statute, it really contemplates international conflict and also non-international
Ganito
conflict.
kasi iyon. Meron tayong law of armed conflict pag naggera ang dalawang estado, dalawang states. Meron tayo law of non-international armed conflict pag naggera ang estado or ang state with a rebel group within its midst. At saka, gumawa tayo ng ganitong distinction para hindi mabigyan ng legality, hindi ma-legitimize ang mga terorista at ang mga rebelde. That is the answer.
Yes.
There is non-international armed conflict in this situation, and we must therefore remember that the terrorists are not entitled, in most cases, to the protections of the international instruments on the conduct of warfare, such as the Geneva Conventions and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Second question, what challenge is posed by the development and the application of humanitarian law to this non-international armed conflict? Bakit napakahirap i-apply ang ating international humanitarian law sa ating sariling bansa dito sa nangyari sa Mamasapano?
Ang nakikita ko po dyan is that marami ho kasing nuances yung tungkol sa pag-apply ng international humanitarian law, because first we have to determine what exactly is the status, Your Honor, of MILF. And I think there's divergence of opinion there. But the MILF has already stated that they remain to be a revolutionary organization. And therefore, as a revolutionary organization, what do we call them? How do we consider them? Is it an insurgent force? Is it belligerent? Although I'm not prepared to concede to that there is
Before,
a status of belligerency.
there was a distinction between an insurgent and a belligerent. A belligerent had more rights under international law than an insurgent, but wala na ngayon ang belligerent
Yes,
in
yes, Your
international
Honor.
law vocabulary.
Under the traditional international law, there used to be a difference, but it has evolved into something else, into something that you don't make any distinction because of the human rights perspectives of all of this.
The challenge in this situation by humanitarian law is the following. The battle or the fight is asymmetrical. Hindi sila magkapantay. Kasi itong isa is a full state with all the requisites of a state. A population, a territory, and the capacity to deal with other nations on an equality basis. Whereas itong isa, pasundot-sundot lang siya para siyang guerrilla force. Kaya hindi mo naman pwede na ipantay ang pagtarato sa kanila, dalawa. Otherwise, you will be giving a premium to terrorists, rebels, and other disgruntled members of any civil society. Finally, what is the distinction between a situation of armed conflict and a situation of law enforcement?
With respect to the situation of law enforcement, definitely all the laws, all our penal laws and other laws would apply. In situation of armed conflict, then that is the time that we can consider principles under a humanitarian law. And it so happened that those principles have in fact been indicated in our domestic law because of our version of the IHL, and I'm referring to RA 9851. And RA 9851 definitely delves on situations of non-international armed conflict and involving certain groups. And if I may add, Your Honor, as I reviewed Republic Act 9851, it seems to apply to particular situations where there is a protracted armed struggle, armed conflict between the state authorities and particular groups. And the application, in fact, is broader in the sense that it refers to non-state actors in general. And when we define non-state actors under international law and even domestic law, this cover a wide range of groups and characters. So not just terrorist organizations, not just insurgent groups, belligerent groups, or even criminal organizations. So the applicability of the 9851 really is something that needs to be scrutinized further. Because as I said, there are nuances. We have to settle first the issue, what exactly is the status of MILF? And therefore, can we apply categorically the provisions of 9851?
Let us recall that the Philippine Constitution provides that international law is part of the law of the land. It is as if it were the principles of international law operate in our country. It is as if the Congress passed that principle because it becomes, in effect, similar to the standing of a law within our country. Now the question is, does international law cover non-international armed conflicts? The answer is self.
Yes, so
The answer
it is.
Yes,
because of
our
the constitutional
international humanitarian law statute and human rights law. For example, it is important for the MILF and the BIFF to be informed of this fact because they seem to be oblivious of it. The Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court includes non-international armed conflict in the concept of war crimes. So I submit that what happened to the 44 Filipinos was a war crime committed by the MILF and the BIFF. And then, may I just go to this point? You said yesterday or 2 days ago that because the PNP is purely civilian in character, there's no such thing as a line of command because that is a military concept. Does that provision in the Constitution, and I have my Constitution here, I believe, defining the PNP as civilian in character, does that prevent the PNP from developing by analogy its own concepts like line of command? Is there a preventive effect on the language employed by the Constitution about the civilian character of the PNP? Does it prevent other terms from the military to be incorporated in the language of the PNP?
There is nothing in the Constitution or any law which prevents that, Your Honor.
Next, perhaps the last, Mrs. Chair, because I'm aware that you are about to treat me like we were in a cornfield.
No, Madam, they've given you much leeway. We know that your time is also limited being here. So we gave you more than 5 minutes, actually, ma'am.